would come off. And you all should know about it, because if I don't say this, I'm just a suck up. And I'm, I don't know, that was my thought in terms of doing it. So I feel like Twitter serves a purpose because there's an instantaneous reaction. Twitter can be amazing because if you're traveling and someone sees you're in a place and they say you've got to go to this restaurant, that's fantastic. So, Kate, sorry.
I just want to add something, and this is just my personal opinion. I like Twitter. I think it does obviously serve a purpose. I guess as a personal eater, I feel like we're losing a little bit of the sense of, can I just go out to eat and enjoy a meal? I don't have to talk about it right away. Because eating to me is a time to slow down and enjoy life. It's one of the best parts of life. So I think that you can talk about it, you can write about it, you can share photos. But you also should just take the time and enjoy it. I don't know. That's where I feel conflicted about the social media, because I feel like we're trying to keep pace and we're losing a little bit of the joy of the process of making and eating food. I don't know.
I think what this whole, if I can try to kind of tie it together a little bit, the issue of how is a tweet from some person tweeting to their friends and family about this great meal that they just had or this terrible meal they just had, how is that different from Steve Dolinsky or any of the people sitting at this table, including Ed, tweeting about their meal that they just had? Because they have the authority, they have somehow through whatever they've been doing accrued this authority to their statements, and that is, I think, at odds with the pressure that a lot of media organizations are under to get things first and fastest and to be constantly producing new content. So on the one hand, you're constantly trying to produce new content to keep up with the flood of user-generated content that is out there on the internet. But at the same time, you're trying to preserve your authority and be able to take the time and say something useful and interesting and different and thoughtful. In an ideal world, that's what we're all trying to do. About the food that's on your plate or where it comes from or the person making it. And so that maybe is something that some of you can speak to. David?
You repeat the question.
do you, as the editor of a food section for a magazine with wide circulation, do you feel the pressure between trying to kind of keep up and constantly produce new content and be able to do kind of thoughtful, informed journalism?
Yes, I do. I think my boss, the editor-in-chief of the magazine, would prefer that I felt that pressure a little bit more. But but for me, what I think is that I don't really see this coming. I don't see competition as people who are on Twitter. But I do see competition in things like Tasting Table and Eater and Grub Street, and that's definitely changed the game. It used to be that, when I started 8 years ago, we had to compete against Chicago Magazine's email newsletter Ditch, which they still do, remarkably, because it's an email newsletter. That's just, it's just not, where it's at, right? So, the take I have is that these people, I don't think that consumers really recognize who has a story first. I don't think the average reader says, oh my gosh, Eater had that first and now Time Out's doing it, or Grub Street had first and now Eater's doing it. So for me, I'm like, okay, great. I have a weekly magazine to put out. I have a slower schedule, and so when I get Tasting Table and it's a restaurant I haven't heard of, I'm like, thank you, Heather. So I do feel the pressure, but not from Twitter, not from users.
Do you feel like there's I'm talking to Paul David because you have a personal Twitter, but then there's also a timeout, what's the at timeout eat?
It's like TOC
TOC eat out.
Yeah.
So do you feel like that tug and pull personal me versus, because you are food at timeout? Is there like a...
Yeah.
Do you worry about who you're tweeting as?
Yeah. God, why are you guys making me say all the things I hate up here? I hate Twitter. It's awful.
Get in the tent.
traditional news, if it's news, I try to do it through, TOC Eat Out, and I have other people who work in the department, and they kind of, in fact, most of the time, just because I'm an anxious person, sometimes I'll take like a 3-week break from Twitter and demand that I actually ask the people who I work with to change the password on the TOC Eat Out Twitter, so I can't get into it, and I can't read what other people are saying because it stresses me out too much. So, I don't, so, that's one.
Can I kind of want to get everyone's opinion from just going back to the Amanda Hesser article we had talked about, where she talked about being a doer first and then writing about it, like for future food writers. Go, be a farmer, go be a cheesemonger, and then write about it. As a writer, I was really discouraged to see that as a writer first, and I was just curious how you guys felt, how you responded to that. Here.
Who wouldn't love to have the time to do that? My fantasy is to be able to take a 6-month sabbatical and spend 3 months learning to make bread and 3 months learning to make ceramics. So to echo some of Ed's pleas, if anyone wants to be a silent benefactor, I promise I'll write great things about it. But yeah, it's great. I think the takeaway from that, and sort of what I was saying earlier, is that a great way to get into the field these days is by being a bit of both. And a great way to keep what you're doing fresh, and I think all of us can attest to this, is by being a full-time professional observer and making sure that you're also just getting your hands dirty in every way that you possibly can, because it's only going to make your writing and your reporting and your perspective of the field and the culture richer.
Also, I don't think her advice was bad, but I do think it's harder to be a good writer than it is to know about food. And so you really have to spend a lot of time learning how to write, and it takes a while. Martha was an editor at The Reader when I was an intern there, and she rejected some of the book reviews that I wrote, so she can probably tell you that it's a process.
It's lifelong too.
Yeah, I'm still learning. I'm sure all of us are still learning. I've learned a lot, but writing is really hard. And learning about food, it takes a while, but I don't think learning about food is actually that difficult.
They're also...
So if I could just say that, as for me, someone who had a background in going to culinary school and cooking in high-level kitchens in Paris and in Spain, and who has gone to Alaska to cook as the chef for a fishing lodge, who really, as someone like me who really values firsthand experience a lot. And I have to go back to Amanda's post about that, but the takeaway message is this is what you should do to be a writer these days. I really say that with my background, I say, no. If you want to write, then as we all, I think many people advise, start writing first. Writing, though, is one thing. Writing for money, especially these days, is another thing. But if you just want to write, by all means, and publicly, we're all intelligent, worldly people. We all know the many ways that we can do that out there now. Do that and find your voice. And if you do have the means to then have firsthand experiences, then by all means do that as well. But what I find sort of discouraging, and again, also as someone who had started a personal food blog in the Stone. Lose connection here. In the Stone Ages of food blogging, when there were literally about 10 of us who seemed to be really good food blogging. Started my food blog in 2004. All these rules now, and there's this whole sort of subculture of people who make quite a bit of money off of blogging in these kind of odd niches. There is that too, but there are so many different ways to approach it. The writing is one thing, the writing for money is another thing, the food blogging as a genre is another. And this brings us to the future. The future then is going to be a lot of, again, it is what we deserve. It's what we, as intelligent, rational, enthusiastic people who are out here on a Sunday afternoon are going to help drive, I hope. I know that there's a big public out there that says maybe otherwise, but we are ultimately going to start, to shape what we ultimately get is what we deserve.
Can I add two things to that? I think it's important to talk about writing, to also think about the different voices